So you can see what happened. I've been telling you about the exploration of the invisible, finding things that they're not clearly there. The press doesn't even tell us about. I get to this place and I say, would you mind if I take a few photographs of your demonstration? And suddenly there are people lining up. And I never thought of myself as a still photographer so much, but in this case it seemed to me like this project chose me, that I had to do this. And they were kind of insisting that this wouldn't just be a couple of shots of this group, but each person individually with each name associated with the photo would continue. So it was, but it also I wanted to add that when we travel, having people with local knowledge of place is also essential. Had I just breezed through and listened to what I knew about Murder City, would I have stopped at this park on a Sunday morning at 9 a.m. and seen these older people gathered there? No, not a lot of press attention or anything like that. They were just out there. Would I have known to stop without somebody taking me there? Probably not. So the question and the challenge this kind of process leaves me with is how long to stay someplace? How long is long enough? How do you listen when you go to a place so that you know that you're hearing the unspoken stories? How long is it time? Do you know when it's time that you can move on? So when I go into places like this, especially the forgotten, the intentionally hidden places along a place like the U.S.-Mexico border, I can only listen to the spirits of that place to see when it might be time for me to listen deeper. And that's just part of the long process of ethnography that goes on in a border odyssey like this. I think I'll stop here and see if there are questions and any discussion about any of this. Since I don't have a lot of time, I'll just tell you that you can go to this Border Odyssey website. You can see this Vimeo again if you'd like. I noticed some people might be taking notes on it. You can see the braceros again. You can also go to this interactive map and see that these cities highlight in their photographs and stories along the way. And of course, I invite you to read the book, which gives you more in-depth knowledge of those places I visited. And as we found last night, there are always things that I don't know. And people will find out different things along the way. Maybe someday you'll even want to go on your own on an odyssey like this. So, thank you very much. So are there any? Yes, sir.
Is there some way you could possibly summarize in any fashion the kind of outstanding experiences that you had during this odyssey?
Well, no, there's no way I can summarize all of them. Each place is its own particular place, and each person is his or her own person. I think because I showed the braceros, that was an unexpected visit with some people that has gone on to change my life. This exhibit now came back to the U.S. It's now at UNC in Chapel Hill. Two people from the braceros came. That's of course a highlight. Some visits along the way that stand out are a visit with a surprisingly open-minded mayor of a Texas town who decides that he wants to take me into Mexico and introduce me to many scenes in Eagle Pass where on the other side, Piedras Negras, there are new cultural sites and art centers and so forth that he wanted me to see, breaking the stereotype about certain elected officials being all about building the border wall and so forth. I also went to a cemetery in a place called Holtville, California, where there are some 800 unnamed farm workers, and talk about the archaeology of the unspoken. That was it was really hard to find this place. I'd heard rumors about it. I'd even read about it in one passage in a book, but there were no directions to it. How do you find this cemetery? I went to this place called Holtville Cemetery. It looked too well kept, and then noticed that there's this gap in the back hedge. And I went through there, and there was a big sign saying, "Don't walk in here, graves can cave in." And I went anyway, and then I found these people. So many stories like that, and I just can't tell you. It was like every place was a new book to read, a new place to go. Hope that helps some. Yes?
This is kind of off topic.
Okay.
I noticed that you quoted John Steinbeck a lot about your travels and about the importance of it, but have you ever read like Jack Kerouac? He's from like
Yes.
the same time period, and he actually travels to Mexico and stuff, and I thought a lot of what you were saying also applied to his books.
And there are others. The reason I started with John Steinbeck, the question, was because he had thought so much about farm workers, and because of his books, and that's how I started this.
Jack Kerouac lived with some migrant workers.
Yeah.
I just thought it was funny how they both related.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. Good. So. Your book would be different. It would start with Jack Kerouac.
Well,
and
yeah, I was
No,
wondering
that's
why, like, if there was another like specific reason you chose like, Steinbeck.
Yeah, I think it was because of his deep influence on me, and that's where. Well, yeah, I think that he specifically was an activist, and he had written also nonfiction books about farm workers, much like Human Cost of Food and so forth. He had been part of organizing farm workers in California and so forth, and that was probably, yeah, I've used that in my farm workers in North Carolina class. But that's good, I like that. Yes, now you.
Okay, so I have a few questions, but I promise they're all connected. So on your front page of the website, under the title, you mentioned, or it says that the website is a companion to the book. So the first question I want to ask is, why did you choose to make the book as the chief product of your project? And then building off of that, like how does the website component, like what is it achieve that the book does not?
Wait, there were the doors squeaked when you said one keyword.
What does the website achieve that the book does not?
Okay.
And then lastly, just kind of wrap it up, like what feedback have you gotten, from your peers or other students about what you've done, about this whole comprehensive project where you have maps, photos, videos, book? What did they say about that?
Okay, those are good questions. Well, you wish when you try to recall an Odyssey like this, you wish for a total recall, that somebody can go along with you on a trip. I mean, that's really the best way to possibly do it. I could just bring all of you along, we'd go back, and I would show you all of these things. But that isn't how human experience really can work. So we've invented ways, from the first cave paintings, where we tell about something that happened, and we try to come up with our best ways of representing it. I knew that the web was coming along. At one point, I said, oh, I think that this can be an ebook, and now it is an ebook. What if, and when I was first starting to imagine it, I thought, well, maybe the print book is going to be kind of passé at some point, and how do we do this? And so I began to think, well, what if you had some sort of an e-reader, and you're clicking back and forth between map and book, and that began to be a sort of dream, like, oh, you could just toggle and you can see, and if, as you know probably, it's really expensive to publish a photo book. Most photographers that I know who have published books of those coffee table books or whatever have what's called a subvention, which means that they have to raise money to pay the press to publish that book. I didn't want to do that, and I'm not that vain to that I thought my photographs deserved coffee table treatment, but I thought that the visual was indispensable. And of course the interactive map, so one reviewer innocently wrote that this book really needs a map. I thought, oh, I missed getting the word to them that there's a map. The map is online, and it's a much more detailed and interactive sort of experience to look at a map like this than what you might find if it were turned on its edge and you read the map like that. Or maybe you could even do 2 pages, but then there would be the gutter. And so I said, well, that would be a way. And then I also have it so that you can just go and you can, if you're reading about Phoenix and you just go there and you just instantly open up that page and photos began scrolling by. And so I just thought, we have it, and web publishing, as you all know, is a lot cheaper. And so you can get photographs out there, you can do a WordPress page, and you can just make it. And that's indeed what I did. And I got students to go along on the journey with me, and to some extent by having them do the resource page and do some of the investigation. And so some of the literary and web-based resources that you see on there were found in part by students with their research. Did I answer all those? I don't remember the last one.
Yeah, that
Okay.
was good.
Okay. Good. I mean, ideally all of that could exist in one place, but I think that's probably the closest. You can just download the book from University of Texas Press or whatever it is, Amazon, and get that book, and then you can have this, and if you carry around your computer, you can have it all there at your fingertips. But I don't think I'll ever give up liking these things, you know. And I think there are some of you 20-somethings who would agree. Is that true? You like these paper things? Hold them. A little bit. Okay, yes.
Do you know whether or not it's the U.S. government or the Mexican government that's preventing the pensions being paid out?
Oh, good question. Thank you. It was about the braceros, and and someone asked earlier to talk about this being a U.S. visa program. It's not the first, and it's not the last. We have, as Jeff already mentioned about the H-2A program, we continue to have people from Mexico come with legal visas to work in our fields and then go home. That's the plan. In fact, that is sort of what many people who are opposed to legal immigration often recommend. Well, we'll just bring people in temporarily without the rights of citizenship. That's what was going on during the Bracero program. We need these people to work in our fields temporarily while World War II was going on, and then there, decades later, you know, that the great out-migration from the South was going on at about those same time period, when African-American sharecroppers were leaving and going to cities to the north, and so there are farmers who really are calling on the government to provide this. H-2A does not have any retirement benefits. And the present-day program is not as fair as the old one, but what didn't happen is that these benefits were never paid, and they began to make the farm workers feel that they had to prove with their documentation. And this is why you see some of the men in the pictures showing, I was a bracero, here's my card, here's a laminated version of some of the paychecks. Can you imagine 50 plus years ago that they actually saved some of their documentation? I have my pay stubs from last year. But to get to your question, I just wanted to give some background. After these protests and after multiple efforts to bring that to the U.S. government's attention and also the Mexican government, because it was an agreement between governments, the U.S. sent 50% of the money that they had in escrow to the Mexican government. Presently, the government of Peña Nieto, the president, it is still withholding that money, that 50% of the money, because they're saying that the burden of proof is on the farm workers themselves. The last I heard, the group, it's a national movement. These are just one chapter, so to speak. And the national movement have been trying to get an audience with President Obama about this. They're not letting up. They're continuing. And how inspiring is that? That if, when they're in their 80s, that they keep going. Some people have already died. They keep going anyway. Their family members keep going. It's just a matter of justice. And it's that leaves me with the message about always, what can I do? Why do I give up? I spoke earlier about being an optimist. It requires some optimism to keep fighting in the face of those kinds of odds against you. Yes? John?
One of the things that I really like about this project is that no matter how much you say about it, it always feels like we're just on this thin layer at the top, and to click on something here takes you into a different set of stories that unfold. I mean, it's sort of like a choose your own adventure kind of cube or something. So, as I want to ask you, as an ethnographer and someone who thinks about the borderlands between ethnography and documentary, in what ways does this project maybe challenge traditional narrative modes of documentary filmmaking or documentary projects? Specifically around contingency, I think, because when I look at this border map and the kind of dots along with what I think are your stops in the Odyssey, I think about travel writing, which also moves along and in which there's a lot of dependency on chance. I mean, in travel writing, this would maybe be called serendipity because it's given this kind of romantic cast. But in ethnography, I think it's something different. And I think in this project, one of the things that I'm picking up on is the place of contingency in travel and how travel can be moving along very quickly and then suddenly stop and move in a totally opposite direction, right? It can, the profundities which are then opened up to you by stopping are also, they're in this kind of dialectical formation with velocity. And so I just wondered, speaking from that tension between, I guess, the non-linearity of a project like this and the kind of predictable narrativity of traditional documentary forms, how do you see ethnography challenging documentary in a project like this?
Wow, I think you said it pretty well. So it makes it complicated, doesn't it? It's documentary, sometimes some forms of documentary want to give you the talking head, to give you the sense that this is the definitive word on a particular subject. And statistics and so forth. And I guess I call into question all of that by starting in the middle of the journey in the front of the book, and you can't exactly do that with a map. But I talk at some point about the useful fiction of a map, that there's no beginning or end really on a journey. It's all up to an individual's decision-making process. In fact, I doubled back a couple of times and went to places off the line because of the story, and those kinds of things really ended up helping me understand the line itself. The line is a fiction we draw. I mean, if we look at it from space, it's not really there. The border wall, of course, is a reality. Border guards are real, but so much of that is a fiction. So much of that history is something we have to tease out and explore together. And I think that's right, that there's no sense of my journey being the be-all and end-all. I think if there is an overall message of it all is that there's no substitute for being there, but we shouldn't have this arrogant sense that our being there is like God being there, that somehow our view of a place is the view. that we can find out stuff, and it's essential that we go. It's essential that we get to know another person, that we find out that person's story. But I've been married to my wife for 30 years. I don't really think that I know her completely. That she doesn't know me either. We're still finding out ways to live together, and that is the human experience. And so it's a challenge to us all to keep delving and to digging and to keep reading and keep understanding, and it's a call to self-educate, and it's a scathing critique of those who believe that they know all about the U.S.-Mexico border from one visit, one day, and then they can make a pronouncement about what U.S. policy should be. When I went there and I met people who lived there, their stories are much different. And so that's, I think, policy requires all of our input, and it requires definitely input from those who are living in a place, but definitely understanding is an ongoing process that never ends. But thank you for that. Yes?
Of the people that you spoke with in Mexico, would you say that they had as strong of an opinion about Americans as Americans do of them, whether it's good or bad?
Yeah, I was surprised at, there's a passage that I have gone back to many, many times in W.E.B. Du Bois's Souls of Black Folk, and written around, I think it's 1910, is that right? Where he talks about double consciousness that African American people had to have living in a place of subjugation. And to some extent, Mexico is in subjugation to the U.S. narrative that we kind of call the shots, so to speak, for so much of Mexican history. And that's one of the things that I get into. But the double consciousness is to know both one's own narrative and to know the other, that of the oppressor or that of the more powerful. And it's also written about it in other places about hidden transcripts, that people know the voices of the less powerful are sometimes much more nuanced. And so that's the kind of experience that I had. You get to Mexico, and every Mexican person knows a whole lot more about U.S. policy and about what politicians are saying and what Donald Trump just said than we know about what Peña Nieto just said about the border. Do we know? Have we been told? Have we been, as our press, paying attention? Their press is paying attention, but even the poorest people know in ways that are surprising. And that has to do, I think, with the fact that our every move influences Latin America in a big way. And one of the sayings is that when the U.S. sneezes, Latin America catches pneumonia. Our policies are huge. NAFTA being one of them we talked about earlier today. Yes. One last question, Jeff? Okay. Yes.
One of the migrant workers, one of the Roseros, Dave stated that in their working efforts that they were taken to Arkansas to work. And it seemed as though he wasn't aware of the implications of his travels. And I was wondering if you believe that when Central Americans are traveling to America to either work or